Revolutions can be romantic and exciting, with singing or with Mel Gibson running in a field, waving a flag in slow motion. We reviewed revolutions like that in part 1 of this 2-part series, which was spearheaded by Christine and Elizabeth of Footnoting History. But revolutions can also be brutal, uprooting societies and cultures in abrupt and drastic ways. In this episode, we will talk about this type of revolution. Gil Kidron and I will review 2 epic movies depicting the great revolutions that affected and still affect the lives of billions. The Russian Revolution and the Chinese revolutions that spanned much of the 20th century. We are Pod Academy, an international podcast where we scour the pop culture for content on science, history, psychology, politics and more. In our episodes we look at 3 movies around a central theme that interests us. I mean, it's not always 3 and it's not always movies, but that's pretty much the format. Gil is a writer who now lives in Tel Aviv, Israel, and I'm Rutger Vos, a scientist from the Netherlands. And we have other guests and collaborators. We love talking to interesting people and learn from them, so if you have something to discuss on the show, we want to hear from you. We post a new episode every Monday.
Now, from the most widely acclaimed novel of our generation, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer presents David Lean's film of Boris Pasternak's Doctor Zhivago. The spectacle of armies changing history. The epic of a grand romantic age giving way to a new and violent order. The drama of young lovers. Far from the bitter guns of war. Alone and silent. This is Doctor Zhivago.
In our previous podcast about revolutions depicted in movies, we talked about the Patriot and Les Miserables, and the American Revolution and the French Revolutions, respectively. So, as we discussed, these movies were made from the point of view of the revolutionaries, the disenfranchised. We failed for them and their cause. Well, now that we've arrived at the 1965 movie Doctor Zhivago, the most famous movie about the Russian Revolution, the movie is no longer sympathetic to the plight of the poor, the disenfranchised, and the destitute. Dr. Zhivago is not even directly anti-revolutionary. It's more like revolutionary or revolutionary. Had the people of Russia just stayed put, stayed silent, not demanded change, that rubbed me the wrong way. That things were okay before they came in with their big ideas and their dirty, ignorant peasants. So the movie starts and ends in 1950s USSR, saying to us, in my eyes, see what you've done? Are you happy now? Is that better? And I want to push back on that. Dr. Zhivago, so that's a 1965 British-Italian movie based on a 1957 Russian novel by Boris Pasternak. And it's not even a historical epic, it's a romantic epic about Yuri Zhivago, a Moscow doctor and poet, and Lara, a young woman. And at the center of the drama are their trials and tribulations, pursuing their love as they find themselves in unhealthy romantic relationships, or just merely unsatisfying relationships. That's the core of the drama of the movie. And as a backdrop, there are less important events like the First World War, the Russian Revolution, the fall of the Tsarist regime, the Civil War, and the subsequent rise of the Bolsheviks, who later established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, more commonly known as the USSR. So it seems that this point of view was very popular in the West, and I was surprised to learn that this movie was one of the highest grossing movies of all time, adjusted for inflation. I was less surprised, though, to learn that this movie was used by the CIA as an anti-communist propaganda tool during the heyday of the Cold War. As the world is burning and the tides of history are forever changing, Russia and the world, the point of view of this movie is the personal angst of a petit bourgeois doctor who is, cue dramatic drum roll, is attracted to a woman who is not his wife.
Dun, dun, dun.
So the various relationships between the characters, they get ample screen time. And there's not a lot of time left over to go over the underlying reasons for this Russian Revolution, the many revolts, the strikes, the protests, alignments and realignments. We have to remember that when the movie came out in 1965, it was 3 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So moviegoers knew coming in that the Reds were bad. So better not complicate things too much. Please don't have sympathetic characters like Fantine or Gavroche from Les Miserables. And let's stick to unsmiling Bolshevik soldiers and dirty poor workers who now feel entitled to make decisions. And this comes in direct contrast with the life that we see at the beginning of the movie from the standpoint of the bourgeoisie of Moscow. It is fun, they eat, they dance, they have affairs, they write poetry. Then these red Bolsheviks come in and everything turns to shit. The production value was impressive, showing us the pre-revolutionary Moscow elite with their fascination with France and the French, their lifestyle and all. But it's pretty disconcerting that the story and the characters are not interested in making sense of the events that are rocking their worlds. Why did all this happen? I don't know. It's mostly the lives of the bourgeois heroes that get steadily worse as the Bolsheviks gain in power. So bourgeois good, Bolsheviks bad. Bolsheviks, they take private property. They force the good doctor to come with them and treat soldiers as the civil war is raging around them, which sounds like the libertarian nightmare depiction of a public health system. They'll force the doctors to work. The most sympathetic scene of the Bolsheviks is when they protest under the slogan "Bread and Peace," to which Doctor Zhivago gives an ironic support, and then the police run them down. But bread and peace, come on. Looking back, when you watch the movie, it seems disingenuous. No. But it's important to judge the historical context of the time and the political and geopolitical context of the time. We can't judge the common people of the time for the collapse of the world around them and the chess game of geopolitics, which later brought the civil war and famine and Stalin and purges. Similarly, we don't judge the American Revolution. Well, Trump. See what your revolution brought us. This orange idiot. There was a political context, and it's not like the British were the good guys. But in Dr. Zhivago, the absence of the white nationalists from the movie, as everything is crumbling down, gives the sense that the Reds are the bad guys.
Now, the most significant counter-revolutionary forces were those of the whites. They were a military nationalist movement started by former Tsar's Chief of Staff General Alexeyev before his death in 1918, and their members came mostly from the old officer class of the Imperial Army. They believed in Mother Russia and abhorred the Bolsheviks, and though they wished for a return to the old order, if not necessarily the Tsar, they lacked clarity of vision and coordination.
The heroes don't even complain too much about the fact that the Reds now house 20 people in their 3-storied house smack dab in the center of Moscow. They don't mind that much because they can get to their winter mini castle. And when the winter mini castle is boarded, well, they have another house right there. In reality, the Russian society was worthy of a revolution, with quasi-slaves, meaning serfs, an unelected monarch, the Tsar, a do-nothing elite that do not work, and landowners who control the economy with an iron grip. We don't expect the 99% to just accept all this lying down because after a bloody civil war with nationalists, then Stalin took power. And what would have happened had the nationalists won the war? Russia would still have been decimated by the First World War and the Civil War, and it very likely would have turned out not too different from other European countries under the yoke of a nationalist regime, like Italy, Spain, or Germany. The Russian nationalists were no less anti-Semitic than the German counterparts, responsible for countless of pogroms over the decades, which is part of the reason for the Jewish immigration to the US at the turn of the 20th century. And in nearby Finland, there was a similar civil war that ended with mass atrocities committed by nationalists. And the Germans and the British were actively supporting the Russian nationalists. So for the common people, this was a war of survival, not to maintain their privileges. Case in point, the rank and file were, on the red hand, made up of soldiers, and on the white hand, made up of rich officers. So unfortunately, Dr. Zhivago spends zero screen time explaining the causes of World War I, a family feud that destroyed the lives of millions who had no bone to pick with the other common people they were fighting against. Zero screen time for the harsh economic conditions of the vast majority of the country. The movie doesn't show us anything bad the white nationalist armies do during the Civil War. It's as if it's a one-sided crusade that the Reds are fighting, and for no good reason. So this is a petit bourgeois story about a poet in love. He has a malaise. He was happy and content, and other people come in and ruin his plans on a good life. Why on earth would they want to revolt? Things are going swimmingly, according to Dr. Zhivago. So Fantine is becoming a prostitute to pay for her daughter to live. Well, it's either that or Stalin. That's what I feel Dr. Zhivago is telling us. Or maybe wait a few years or generations, and the benevolent landowners would have enacted just reforms for everyone. Because when we look at the world even today, of course, all we see are powerful people racing to change things for the better for the 99%, even if it means having 1 million or 1 billion less, right? So that's my beef with Dr. Zhivago. It makes it seem that an authoritarian communist regime was the inevitable result of an ideological crusade and not the result of an incredibly complex number of political and geopolitical processes, internal pressures, and foreign involvement that led the world in that path. By the way, Russia now today has a nationalist regime with President Vladimir Putin. How is that working out? Okay, so let's open this up for discussion. Tell me what you think.
Well then.
I had a beef.
You definitely held back.
But it was a good movie.
Well, I think one of the things, though, like the Bolsheviks were not at all inevitable, even when revolution started. You know, like if the Mensheviks had a chance, and if there hadn't been, pushback from the whites, and also from, by the way, foreign expeditions, right? Like there was actually armies of other countries fighting against the revolution. There was the Czechs, there was, I think, British expeditionary forces and whatnot. Maybe if there hadn't been that much pushback, that it could have evolved more in kind of a social democratic direction, and not the radicalization of the Bolsheviks in the end. Right?
And even that, to bring in the geopolitical context in World War I that you were mentioning, I mean, Germany is the reason Lenin comes back, right? Because they pay for that. So yeah, it's this very, it's these pieces moving on a chessboard, but that doesn't, as you pointed out, mean that everything was like hunky-dory and wonderful for the people, the peasants living in Russia prior to that experience.
Definitely. Like I would have been pro-revolution. I have nothing good to say about the USSR or Stalin, obviously, but it's a Cold War product. I felt like it was lacking in context and history, and I feel like I could have enjoyed it more because other pieces were there, acting and scenery and all that.
I think one of the things that has been inserted into the movie at something that just triggered me kind of after the fact. Like, do you guys know the TV series Allo, this British comedy series?
Oh, I do not.
Yeah, it's about occupied France, and it's a sitcom,
Right,
essentially a sitcom with the Nazis. And there is Herr Flick of the Gestapo, and Strelnikov totally reminds me of Herr Flick of the Gestapo. Like, he's got the long leather jacket and like the little round glasses, and he's very sort of cold, like when there's the interrogation in the armored train. It totally reminds me of, okay, we're supposed to maybe think also a little bit about the Nazis. Like, these Bolsheviks are very, very militant, very intolerant, and they just, subject you a very hard interrogation because they're just cold like that,
Rutger, remember when we talked about the movie 1917, they depict, like, there were two interactions between British soldiers and German soldiers, and the German soldiers were violent and kind of like without even logic, just like really fervent, who had this zeal, and this goes counter into the major themes that we know about World War One. And for us, it was obvious that this is the result of, we know what happened later in World War II, that the Germans became the bad guys, so now it's harder even to portray them differently in World War One. And that's in contrast with a movie between the wars, No News from the Western Front, that was made in 29. And there the Germans, it's an American movie based on a German book, and there the Germans are totally sympathetic and you are totally with them. So that was kind of the thing for me.
Yeah.
I love All Quiet on the Western Front.
All Quiet, sorry. In Hebrew, I translated from the Hebrew translation. All Quiet. In Hebrew, it's No News.
It's okay. There are 1,000 different languages to translate it into. It was interesting what you said in the little opening monologue about what you wish they had shown. So my experience with Doctor Zhivago, as I told you guys before we started recording, was just a musical version of it. But right before I started watching the movie this time, I was reading simultaneously 2 different books about the actress Natalie Wood, and her parents came over to the United States as a result of the Russian Revolution. So I was reading about these people on the ground and this family who, they were not a family before they came over. They met here. But the 2 sides of her family that eventually went from what was then Russia into China, and then through China to California and Canada and US and all those North American areas. And then I watched the movie and I said to myself, okay, so I just really like that these are people who were living their lives and this stuff was happening to them. Right? Like, we get a lot of like in Les Mis, it's the students who are throwing this, having this revolution, and in The Patriot, he's actively, partaking in this event. And even in, which we're not up to yet, The Last Emperor, like, he's in the Forbidden City and the things are happening kind of outside of him. But this is the one where we see the people who the things are happening to the most. No, they're not involved in it, and like, it would be kind of cool to see the mechanisms behind it and how it all got to happen. But it's kind of interesting because if you really think about it, the majority of the population is having it happen to them. Yeah. Right? So, even though those are not real people. I liked that aspect of it because...
as a storytelling tool.
Right. It was cool. Like, the scene where he comes back and he just finds out that his house is no longer really his house anymore was, to me, like, the biggest, most... like, oh my gosh, moment.
Yuri, this is Comrade Yelkin, our local delegate. He lives here.
Oh, welcome.
Comrade Caprugina.
Welcome.
It is not for you to welcome us, comrade.
Comrade Caprugina is the chairman of the Residence Committee.
Holy Cross. What? Holy Cross Hospital, it's on...
The Second Reformed Hospital.
Good, it needed reforming.
Because that's when everything gets real. And we talked about this last time with, like, when it becomes personal. Mm-hmm. And there are obviously things where it becomes personal for him before that, throughout the movie. But, like, that's when it really, literally hits home. He comes home and he's like, oh, right, so this is, like, not only happening, but it's literally taking over every aspect of my life at this point. And not all of us would have multiple houses that we can just go to. But I remember when I was watching the movie, that was the scene where I kind of just went, oh, okay, this is getting real personal right now.
Well, this is the point where I'm really, really getting inconvenienced by this revolution that's going on.
Well, right, exactly. It's like now I really have to have a super opinion because I don't even have my own bedroom anymore. You know, he thinks he's coming home, right? And it's all like over, quotations over. You know, he's coming home. He's going to be reunited with his like cushy house and be happy. And then he walks in and he's like, what is going on? How many families are in this house? And what do we do about it?
There was living space for 13 families in this one house.
Yes. Yes, this is a better arrangement, comrades. More just. But it is more just. Why does it sound so funny?
But he's pretty cavalier about it. That was kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Like they were like, "Ha, this is an experience." That was weird.
I mean,
That was weird.
I was watching it. I thought to myself, well, maybe he's just saying that so they don't kill him for objecting, right? Like if he comes home and he's like, "F you, please get out of my house," I really don't know that would have ended well for him.
Well, I think that part, that scene actually, I really liked in the sense that it seemed like kind of real, that probably when you enter into a situation like that, at first you're just flabbergasted, like, okay, so
right.
the house
Right.
is full and there's now these commissars who are telling me that now it's finally time to start working, and like you're
Right.
part of the house. I think the first couple of minutes probably all you can do is kind of laugh, like, okay, what's happening here?
Right.
And then
Yeah.
gradually the reality sinks in, and gradually you also see that now the shoe is on the other foot, and maybe if I make a problem, there's the bullet for me. So
Right.
let's just go
Right.
along.
It's definitely a very human scene.
I kind of had an experience kind of similar to that. It's a weird build-up, but let's hope there's a payoff at the end. So when I was traveling in India, one of the times that I was traveling in India, I was on a night bus, and you have all like the regular seats, and then you have like beds on top for tourists and rich Indians. And I don't know if you've been to India, but let's say that there's always like overcapacity on trains and buses and everything. And then along the way, like the night route, they stop whatever 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and then you go to the bathroom, you order some chai, something like that. So I went down, and then first of all, I opened the window and I see the masses below me. And that's already like a very uncomfortable situation. You're like, wow, I'm like mega, super, ultra rich here. Like they're all crammed all over each other. I step over them like they're sleeping. I go out, and when I come back, apparently they thought that I would not come back. And they were like sleeping in my bed and climbing together. And I came and I was like, like Doctor Zhivago, I wasn't laughing. So that's, I would have thought that he would have reacted the opposite way. It's just like, what the hell is going on? Okay, so we don't have, like, politically we can empathize with the poor people and the destitute, but this is a human emotion. You come there, he's not a bad guy. He has good intentions. He comes in, he sees his house, he's taken over, doesn't protest even a little, just like whatever, just to see, okay, maybe I should accept it because they will kill me. Just immediately it was, I don't know, that was weird. Yeah, that was weird for me.
I think the main difference there is that they probably weren't going to kill you for objecting on the night bus.
They were not.
If I had walked into the house in his situation, I probably would have been like, just tell me where to go. Like, just don't hurt me and let me, because that's when you know that they're really coming for you.
Yeah. I didn't lose a war before. I didn't lose a war from when I left the bus and come back. Had I lost the war,
well, yeah,
that would have been.
It was, a little tough on.
One of the things that I really loved, in the house, like, okay, so he goes in, and not only is it divided up, you can see that it's already being torn to shreds.
It's all dark and gross.
Yeah, and you can kind of see between a couple of scenes, there's like the rails of the stairs, which is all wooden, and from one scene to the next, you can see there's more wood been taken out as fuel.
It's getting torn down.
It's very subtle, like you see, like they're slowly burning up the furniture and the house. Then he also goes looking for wood elsewhere in the city. That's when his brother first see him. So there's like this gradual, like all of the things that have been built up are gradually just being consumed and burnt up and used up, basically.
To just build upon that whole concept of like who this movie is about, and it's the petite bourgeoisie, right? And it's not necessarily their revolution, or it's not their revolution at all. And it's kind of like, so when we talked about the Patriot last week and we said that like a third of American colonists supported the revolution, a third were loyalists, and a third didn't really care, right? So this is kind of like the movie about the group that was like not super invested politically either way. And it's the same thing with when we talked about Les Mis last week, when people went out for Lamarck's funeral and everything, but then they don't show up to the revolution because, various things. And so, yeah, we are, like Christine was saying, we're getting this glimpse into the lives of the non-revolutionaries. And although I agree that it lacks anything to do with why the revolution happened, probably because Boris Pasternak was not a fan of the revolution, which is why he smuggles this book out. But it's that weird thing where we're looking at the group who don't really care because it hasn't been so negative for them. And now it has become negative. And so that's,
I love that. Well, I love that because it's like, for many people, it just becomes a survival story, right? Like, weather the sea change and hope that you're going to get through it.
Yeah.
And you don't see that often. It's usually either like, these people are so great and they won, or, oh my gosh, here's the tragedy of the defeat. And this is the group that's kind of like, how am I going to just get through whatever this is and kind of make it to the other side with some aspect of my before life still intact? You know, right or wrong, that's just another angle that I find really interesting to look at.
Right.
Yeah, he's not anti-revolutionary. He kind of likes the ideas. He's kind of, I guess he would have been like a liberal at the time. And bread and peace, that's nice. Yeah, that's nice. Let's all get along, go along to get along. It'll be fine.
Justice, equality, and bread. Don't you think they're splendid?
Yes, I do.
Brotherhood and freedom.
He's just not, beating his chest and like running down to, he's not Pasha, right? Who I love because I love any origin story for a villain.
So, Christine, to your point, and I think we talked about it also in the last podcast. Also, actually, Elizabeth, you also just mentioned it. Like, today, this movie would have been made differently. Even if you would have taken the same story, the same book, because you would want, because now it's relevant what was the political context. And the fact that it was so successful at the time tells us maybe as much about the time than about the story. Because you are both right. There's a value in hearing this kind of story from this kind of person that this impact this way. It's not something that is not worth creating a movie about, definitely.
Have any of you read the book? Because I want to know if the framework, that the way they frame it with the like guy looking for the who he believes is his niece, is that in the book or is that a device for the movie?
I honestly don't know.
All right, if anybody sees me using my phone, I'm looking it up.
Okay. I do want to add that when Christine watched this movie, the text I received from her was like, "What's wrong with his wife? His wife is fine."
I like
his wife, right? Like she was like, "I don't understand what's so great about Lara," and that was like the text message chain that I received, just to add a moment of levity in the middle of our revolutions and downtrodden.
No, it was true because I kept thinking to myself, I don't get it.
Oh, I bought you this. It has a piece in it about young Russian poets.
Oh, good. Thank you. Does it mention me?
It begins with you. You're the best.
Very intelligent nation, the French.
And I know that's like, I'm going to probably get hate mail now again because it's supposed to be this like epic like love story that happens in the middle of this war situation. And I'm sitting there going, but nothing really causes me to feel that he should be turning away from his wife because she's kind of a really good person and she stays with him through like all the nonsense that happens.
Yeah, or they should have just stayed in the dacha, him and Tonya, and just grown potatoes and lived their life. Why are you going into town and look for Lara? Don't do that.
You could have like ended the movie at intermission
Right.
And it would have just been like, and then they stayed as potato farmers.
Exactly. And they lived happily ever after on the Russian countryside. Yeah.
Yeah, his wife even seems more interesting than Lara. Like they didn't spend a lot of time to making except shots that shows us so she's beautiful. But he goes into such lengths for her and falls so much in love with her in a way. And she's 18 at the time when they meet, 17. Yeah, that was like.
What are we going to do? I don't know. If we'd had children, Yuri, would you have liked a boy or a girl?
I think we may go mad if we think about all that.
I shall always think about it. Will you write today?
No, not today.
It's as if a story it's like a fairy tale, a fairy tale.
Fine, but like it's not like I guess I just had a hard time kind of pulling for them because I was like, why am I? Why?
Yeah.
I was really texting her saying like, so I'm watching Doctor Zhivago and I just I don't think I love them together as much as I'm supposed to because I can't find anything wrong with Tanya. Tanya, that's the wife's name, right? And I'm going, she's not horrible to him. Now, Pasha, okay, like, he becomes really evil, but, like, in the beginning of the movie, he's not so bad.
Pasha! He's my brother.
Well, take him home, miss, before he gets into trouble.
Pasha, please.
It's got to be done.
Oh, Pasha, why has it got to be done?
For them. For the revolution.
Oh, Pasha, they don't want a revolution.
Yes, they do. They don't know it yet, but that's what they want.
Give me some of those, comrade.
Pasha, are you a Bolshevik?
No. The Bolsheviks don't like me, and I don't like them. They don't know right from wrong.
Oh, Pasha Antipov, you're an awful freak.
Why did you tell him I was your brother?
Well, what else could I have told him?
You could have told him I was your fiancé.
Pasha, don't be silly.
And which again is why I find him interesting because I like to see how somebody who, from the film at least, I haven't read the book, film's perspective, goes from being somebody who completely just buys into this revolution so much to then ultimately become so corrupted essentially by it that he becomes the villain of the story. And that's really cool because everybody else seems to kind of stay almost static in their opinions of what's going on. And I'm not saying I agree with how he goes in his life because I had a conversation this weekend that somebody took the fact that I said something was an interesting historical period to mean that I agreed with what happened during it. And that is not the same thing. Saying that you find something fascinating does not necessarily mean that you're co-signing what the person did. So,
right.
Yeah.
I guess World War II
I was
is
like,
boring,
if we think that all historians who study their periods agree with what happened in them, we have some big conversations to be having. But it was interesting to me to see that, the person who buys the most into this revolution is the one who ultimately becomes the bad guy. I was like, Liz, I don't understand the whole Lara thing, and also this does not make people who are pro-revolution look very good.
But to your point about the other people being maybe a little bit static, like I thought it's also like the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yevkav, who sort of he starts out as a cop and he rises through the ranks a little bit, but he's basically unchanged throughout almost more than 50 years of Soviet life and turmoil and all the rest, and he kind of has this vaguely ironic smile on his face, and he's kind of nice to everyone, even though I guess with the blue he's NKVD or whatever he is. That's kind of weird. Also, he has no character development really. Yeah, he's kind of intimidating, but it's not really clear why.
Yeah, everybody's scared of him.
So now I feel like we all need to read Doctor Zhivago because I'm like, was it just this really bad translation to the screen, or was everybody lacking nuance except Pasha? Like, what happened in this book?
No, it's not clear. Is there any character development at all?
Although I think it's really long, so there's that. I feel like I think the book is long.
Is it though?
I don't know.
I don't know.
I know you're Googling that.
I'm looking. I'm trying to find out. According to this, they do have in the book the bit about thinking that she must be the girl must be the daughter.
Okay.
That is in the book.
Okay. It's weird that in a time where everything changed over and over and over, and then there's this great line. I don't have it in front of me, but it's something along the lines of, I wish this band of hooligans, this or that band of hooligans will decide already who is in charge. This is a great way to describe governments everywhere. So, what was my point? I got derailed myself. Where did I start?
Well, based on what you said, I think that revolution fatigue is a very real thing. People start off, either very pro or very anti, or as Liz was saying, not caring. But eventually, you get to a point where it's like, can we just figure out what's going to happen next? Because
Oh yeah, you have to. Yeah, at first it's really exciting that this is now Brumaire instead of the old months' names, and then after a while you're still not used to it. Like, what day is it today again? When is the market?
Yeah, we actually have that here now. There's a political plan, whatever, by the Israeli government, the right-wing government, to annex parts of the West Bank. And the Palestinian Authority was banking on having people in the street and demonstrating against that to whatever, have pressure on the international community and all that. 200 people, 200 Palestinians showed up for this protest. Right. Even they, everybody's so tired. It's like, whatever.
Yeah, and
whatever.
I definitely think that you see that in this a little bit, because I feel bad saying that nobody had an opinion change or they were ecstatic, because there were subtle things about it, but it's not like a dramatic sort of, oh my gosh, here we are, we're so passionate this whole time. It definitely does become like all right, let's just put our heads down and hope this ends soon, and we all get through it, and we're here on the other side together, and I might have my girlfriend on the side too, and we should all really like that because the music is cool. Like, I don't know, that's how it seems at some point. Like the lush score and the sweeping epic nature. Like, how do you adapt that from novel to screen to stage? And it's true because visually, like, Russia becomes a character. You get to see the city versus the countryside and what war does to all these places and how the places get boarded up, right? Because they get taken over, even in the countryside. And the only place that's left is the little shack, and
it's a pretty big shack from the inside. It's pretty big.
It is. It's like the TARDIS.
It's like, I was about to say, it's like Doctor Who's.
I thought that in Harry Potter, they also have these these tents when you come in. It's very big.
It's bigger on the inside, right?
That's right.
When we were talking about this earlier, you said something about the spaghetti western, right? Because it's an Italian movie. So actually, that speaks to the points that you just talked about now. One major theme of these spaghetti westerns is just like the person, the sole person, like in front of nature and the wheels of history. Everything is changing, and he's right there, and it kind of fits the themes in this movie, like the revolution and all, and then the civil war. It's like a force of nature that just happens, and he just needs to weather the storm,
right.
Come back, and then at the end also Moscow looks kind of regular, like you wouldn't know that anything happened, really, when he walks on the street and sees maybe Lara. And the fact that they end on that and even skip over the resolution of the civil war and all that, just like it ends on the personal note, highlights that this is just a story about a guy who likes a girl, even though he's married.
Yeah. I mean, it is cool, even because I'm going to keep bringing up Pasha because I do like him. But once you find out that he's the evil guy at the end, right before the intermission, like, you almost never see him again. I mean, you do see him again, but like compared to what you would think, like in Les Mis, right? Javert keeps popping back up like over and over and over again. Yeah. In The Patriot, they're perpetually fighting the enemy.
Lucius Malfoy is constantly
he's in The Patriot all the time. In this movie, it's like we get the like realization that that's who this evil person is that they're talking about is like riding on the train and whatever. We figure it out. And then it's like, okay, but he's just kind of hovering in the background and very rarely on the screen for the whole second half.
Yeah, and he uses his original name, so which is kind of an interesting part about these revolutions is that people use all these pseudonyms and stuff, and of course that happened during the Russian Revolution enormously as well, Lenin and Stalin and Molotov and all the rest. And he becomes Strelnikov, but then when he's captured on the way to the dacha, he just has his original name and, basically, I'm the husband of Lara and I'm going to meet my wife. And then then they catch him. Basically.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I thought that was interesting how little you do see him for him being this, like, kind of...
Yeah, but he's kind of also
enemy.
the symbol of this looming system that gets more and more oppressive, because they also sometimes they show these photos of first Lenin and Trotsky, and then later in the last shot of Lara, when they say, she probably was on one of the lists and the list was mislaid and she disappeared, and then you see her walking away and this big photo of Stalin,
Stalin.
This is the purges, this is this whole system just gets more and more oppressive and murderous, and Pasha is kind of just a the manifestation of that in a single person.
But which is cool. I think that's a really interesting way to do it, as opposed to just having him like literally sitting there causing people problems constantly. Because a lot of times, sometimes the threat is worse than the confrontation.
Yeah,
that's very true.
Yeah.
By the way, the book is apparently 600 pages. So
okay, so you can read it, Elizabeth, and then you'll just
I'll give you the cliff notes. Yep, I'll
yes.
I'll run it through.
Well, what I'm kind of curious about is the extent to which the slant is also kind of different in the book, because it was published in Italy by Feltrinelli, right, that was kind of a fancy family at first, but I think he kind of became a left-wing. It's a bookstore that still exists in Italy, right? There's a couple of Feltrinelli shops, and I think he wasn't, when he decided to publish it, it wasn't because, I'm a convinced anti-communist and we'll get those Reds when we publish this book. So I don't know if there's a difference in that sense also between how it's depicted on screen versus how it's actually written. Like on those 600 pages, if there's 50 pages of exposition about the plight of the serfs and how terrible they were suffering, well, that really changes the angle right there, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
And apparently, Dr. Zhivago is also now part of the Russia school curriculum. So all the equivalent of 11th grade, so around like age 16 or 17, that's one of the books that students in Russia read.
Of course, because they're now in favor of the
right?
Tsar.
So it's like,
the Tsar died.
This is so sad, October Revolution. Oh.
I think that's the same year. I think 11th grade is the same year that I read All Quiet on the Western Front.
I've never read All Quiet on the Western Front.
Oh.
I know.
Sorry. my gasp of horror.
I know.
Yeah,
it's
much shorter than Doctor
Zhivago. It's not. I think it's not even 200 pages. I think it's like 100 and something.
Oh, you would like it, I think. Liz really loved World War I.
Yeah, it's like my second favorite war right after the Crimean. Go with that. And now that we're going to get hate mail about me declaring the Crimean to be my favorite war.
Favorite wars? You're like Dick Cheney. What are the favorite wars? Right, when the Sacha Baron Cohen interviewed him.
Yeah, that's the thing. You say favorite, and people come down like, "Did you agree with when that person did such and such?" And you're like, "No, it just means I really find like learning about how it all worked really."
No, you say favorite. It's on tape. It's on tape.
As Christine said, it doesn't mean I support the war or anything. I just find it fascinating.
I text Liz during that movie too, and my texts during that movie were, "Nobody looks good by the end of this."
I agree.
Nobody does. That is true. In any revolution,
nobody.
That's probably the most honest answer, right? Though at the end of the revolution, nobody comes out looking clean. Right? Whereas in all the other movies we've talked about, there's obviously that bias to try and make somebody look good. And in this one, it's that did not work. But anyway, okay.
Yeah, Rutger,
tell us about China,
try
please.
to make your case. Make your case. Why is this one different?
In a land of tradition, a place of mystery, China's forbidden city. He was the Lord of 10,000 years. He was the Son of Heaven. He was 3 years old. He was the last emperor.
Perhaps emperor has been a prisoner in his own palace since the day that he was crowned.
The epic story of an ancient empire colliding with the modern world.
I'll try to set the stage a little bit here. So here we go. Yeah, so you know how like in Chinese political discourse there's this habit that they have of making little lists of things, and they're good or bad or desirable. So for example, there was the big revolution in 1911 that turned China into a republic, and that was inspired by the three principles of the people: nationalism, democracy, and livelihood. And then later on, by the end of the movie, there's the Cultural Revolution, and there was, there the four olds needed to be destroyed. The old customs, the old culture, old habits, and old ideas. And now to set up this final film, we can also add the three myths of Chinese expression. So the first myth here that I want to talk about is about this statement that was supposedly made by the foreign minister under Mao, Zhou Enlai, when Nixon visited China in the early 70s. And then when he was asked what the impact was of the French Revolution, he's supposed to have said, "Oh, it's too early to say." Now the story is a myth because it was based on a misunderstanding. Zhou thought he was being asked about the student protests in Paris in '68. And indeed, it was too early to say. The 68 had barely started their long march through the institutions at that point. And no doubt, even in the supposed long-term vision of the Chinese, the French republicanism that finds its roots in 1789 had become irreversible by the 1970s. But the anecdote does raise the question of what the lasting impact is of revolutions on the people that lived through them and the generations that follow. "Bliss it was in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven," wrote Wordsworth about the French Revolution. Well, maybe it was, but it was definitely interesting times. Which takes us to the second myth. We in the West think that there's a Chinese curse that goes, "May you live in interesting times." There is no such curse, but we all do get the point. It might be better to live in times with little upheaval, uninteresting times. And the third myth is about Chinese writing. Business leaders and motivational speakers like to say that the Chinese character for the word crisis are actually the combination of danger and opportunity. Again, it's not really true, it's mistranslations, but the myths do lead us to the protagonist of our final film, The Last Emperor.
He was Puyi, Lord of 10,000 years.
10,000 years!
The last Emperor.
Film is Puyi, the final ruler of the Qing dynasty, who lived through very interesting times, full of danger and opportunity, and whose lasting impacts we might not be able to tell yet. But to understand what the movie is about, we probably need to fill in some facts. Most of our audiences live in the West, and we probably haven't had a lot of education in Chinese history or geography, so let's do a quick crash course. China is a massive place on the eastern end of Eurasia, which I guess we all know. It's been ruled for millennia by different dynasties. For example, over the last 1,000 years, there's been the Song dynasty, pretty much during the High Middle Ages in Europe. Then the Mongols appeared and started making trouble for everyone in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Japan, and also China. Under Kublai Khan, they installed themselves as emperors, founding the Yuan dynasty, which lasted roughly till the Black Death in Europe, the mid-1300s. The Yuan dynasty was replaced by the Ming, which ruled during what's the Renaissance for us. And the final dynasty to appear was the Qing, which replaced the Ming in the mid-1600s and lasted until Puyi. These dynasties were not necessarily royal families. Instead, they were different types of social orders with different cultural sensibilities. They ruled because they had acquired the mandate of heaven, which you might compare with the European divine right of kings. A dynasty might lose the mandate because of externalities that were seen as signs, such as natural disasters or famines, or because their subjects lost confidence in them. The Qing rose against the Ming because they had grown resentful and had compiled another one of those lists, the 7 grievances of the Qing. This is a bit like documents such as the Dutch Act of Abjuration against Philip II or the US Declaration of Independence against George III. The dynasties ruled over an empire, which doesn't just mean that China is a massive place, but like all empires, it's an amalgamation of different peoples. There's the Han, the Mongols, the Tibetans, the Hui Muslims, and the Manchu. The Han are the biggest group, but they were removed from power when the Qing dynasty, who were Manchu, took over. So this is how Puyi, a Manchu and the last Qing emperor, spent his youth in the Forbidden City in Beijing. Now these different groups are color-coded, and you can see it actually in the movie. The banner of the Manchurian Qing dynasty shows a dragon on a yellow field. When the Republic is declared, the flag changes to one with 5 bands. The yellow still refers to the Manchu, the whites for the Tibetans, which you might remember when you think of the snow-capped peaks of the Tibetan Plateau. Black is for the Muslims. It helps me to think of the black flags of the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of their faith. Also, Pan-Arab flags have 4 colors, white, black, red and green, associated with the different caliphates, and there the black refers to the first caliphate, founded by the Prophet. The blue band refers to the Mongols. Like other people of the Central Eurasian steppes, they traditionally worship the god of the big blue sky over the steppes, Tengri. You can see this blue also in other Central Eurasian flags, such as that of Kazakhstan or the current flag of Mongolia. Red is for the Han. In Chinese culture, red also refers to good fortune. You can see this in the movie when Puyi gets married. The Forbidden City is dressed up in red, with big banners showing the double happiness character for marital bliss. The envelopes of money that Chinese people give to each other for the Lunar New Year are also red. And red symbolizes progress, and you can see this in the movie as well, in a brief shot near the end. There's a traffic light and people are standing still in front of it when it's green. When it changes to red, people start moving. I also saw this symbolism myself when I visited China. I went to a research institute where on one of the walls they had a big project management chart. The projects that were completed were indicated with a red flag, which is the exact opposite of what we would do in the West, where a red flag means a problem or danger or blood. So the red of the communist flags has different connotations in Chinese culture. Now within this setting, this complex cultural setting with shifting balances between different groups and dynasties, foreign colonial powers started intruding from the long Chinese coast during a century of humiliation that looms large in Chinese memory. All the way to the south, in the tropical part of China, the British had forced their way in as a result of the First Opium War and had set up shop in Hong Kong, events described in a Footnoting history podcast. Going north, the coast then forms a long arc, next to which lies the island of Taiwan. Fought over by the Dutch and the Portuguese, it has functioned several times as the last stand of the previous regime. The last Ming were on Taiwan, and now it's a country founded as the last refuge of the Kuomintang in the civil war with the communists. Further north along the coast lies Shanghai, one of the cities in which Western powers obtained so-called concessions, bits of land where they set up trading posts. You can still see this in the cityscape. Fin de siècle European architecture on the bank of the Huangpu River is dwarfed by the futuristic high-rises of the new skyline on the other bank. Going still further north, we end up in the large-scale geography where much of the trouble in the movie takes place. This is the northeast of China, where Beijing lies, not too far from a large bay. The northern entrance to the bay is the Liaodong Peninsula. This is from where the Qing first started expanding in the 1600s. It's also where a war between China and Japan took place in 1894 to 95, resulting in the loss of the peninsula to Japan. Fast forward another 25 years and it's the place from where the Japanese invade Manchuria. They install Puyi there in a farcical retake of his imperial rule. It's an act of treason that lands him in a communist re-education camp after the war. It is there that he writes his confession and self-criticism. It then takes a few rounds of editing to make it readable, but it becomes part of the basis for the movie. When Puyi is sufficiently re-educated, he is set free to become a peasant gardener. In a twist by the end of the movie, he appears to show a kind of Stockholm syndrome when he speaks up for one of his prison guards during a struggle session of the Cultural Revolution. We're not sure if the remodeling into a revolutionary citizen has impacted him throughout though, because one scene later, he still declares himself the former emperor of China in an intimate scene with a little pioneer kid inside the Forbidden City. It looks like his spirit has actually still survived. Kinda like the talent for playing the balalaika in Zhivago's daughter. So there we are.
Nice tie-in.
No, I like that.
That was good.
I like that.
Yeah.
I actually think these, outside of the whole tie-in to, the revolution theme, like, one of the good things that ties it together is it's a different kind of survival story, right? Like, he doesn't realize he's just surviving, right? Once they show him what's happening outside, because when he's little, he really only knows the world that he's in, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, when he's little, but it's pretty amazing how clever and opportunistic he still was, or what's kind of survival instinct, because he was raised in a totally infantile setting with the poo sniffing and all the rest. And then there had been 20 different occasions where he could have got the bullet right there, right? In the first revolution and second on the Japanese after the war. Yeah. And he makes it all the way through. It's amazing.
Really love the scene where they first show him what's outside. And he's like mind blown that he's not actually the emperor of everything.
It was 1924. Parliament had been dissolved again. The president had fled. At first, I thought it was just another coup d'etat by just another warlord. Only this time it was different. This time it was my turn.
Now we shall remove the foreign stench of the Manchurian rats who still hide in the Forbidden City.
Mr. Puyi and his family have been given 1 hour to leave the Forbidden City. They will be escorted to the home of his father and remain there under guard as state prisoners until further notice. What are you all looking at? What are you standing there for? You always wanted to leave the Forbidden City. Now you've got an hour to pack, so go.
You could just imagine the enormity of that, right? Basically, your whole life has been people protecting you and catering to you, and you're the most important person to ever exist on the planet at the time, and all of a sudden you find out you're not actually in charge of anybody outside your own walls.
Kind of him being imprisoned in the castle and oblivious to the hardships of life. It's kind of like the story of Siddhartha, who before becoming Buddha, he was raised in a castle, and then comes out, and then like, oh, outside there are some things happening. I guess they reacted a little bit differently, but Rutger, so you think that this movie kind of positively portrays China because?
No, I think so.
Okay.
I think so actually. So
state your case.
It's true. It's true that nobody comes out looking great, but I think you also have to consider the time in which it is made, because 1987 was the time of Deng Xiaoping, and the time when we in the West thought, oh, there's glasnost, there's perestroika, maybe China goes that same kind of way. 1989, Tiananmen Square hadn't happened.
Right, well, that's
so
it.
we thought, well, maybe China's going to soften up as well. And from the perspective of like Deng, Mao had some flaws. So, for example, in kind of the same way that after Stalin, Khrushchev did the de-Stalinization, well, Deng did a little bit of de-Maoization. And so, for example, they actually did admit, well, maybe the Cultural Revolution was a bit of an oopsie, right? And so then in the way it's depicted in the movie, it's also, okay, it doesn't look great, but also it doesn't look terrible. Like, okay, the Cultural Revolution, I guess it's the main torture is with accordions, I suppose. And there's some singing and dancing in the street. It's not terrible. The re-education camp is also, okay, if it was a youth hostel, I'd be pretty upset. But it wasn't the worst. And like and during that time period, like from the 50s to the 60s, first in the Great Leap Forward, like 20 to 50 million people died. And in the Cultural Revolution as well, you don't see any of that.
I see what you mean.
It's actually pretty friendly, all in all, to the system. And by the way, so at no time in the whole thing, the word Mao is ever, like that name never comes up.
No.
Yeah.
That's kind of incredible.
Right.
Kind of like a symbolism. I have like the symbolism of the colors in mind, and Christina and Elizabeth, tell me what you think. Like, so when the movie starts, everything is colorful and looks happy. Mm-hmm. And the communists are like gray and drab, and they're always like sullen or angry. And kind of without even saying anything, I feel like I don't like those. I don't like them. Everything, they have to sing along everything.
Yeah, but the camp, you also have to see the perspective that re-education camp from the Chinese perspective is like Spandau prison in Berlin or something. Like, okay, here's the worst of the worst. It can be a little unpleasant.
Yes,
there. That's fine. Right?
I'm just saying that this is what the movie shows. Just like contrasts.
Right.
Stylistically, the movie is showing that everything was beautiful and glittering. I think also it's important that he lives, right? Like, they don't kill him. This isn't the Russian Revolution where the Tsar and his family are brought into the basement.
That's such a cool thing.
This is, and it's true, right? That they kept him alive and he just dies as an old man. And so it's this very, and he gets an arc. So I know, Rutger, that you were saying that you're not quite sure that he buys into the revolution because he says at the end, like, oh, hey, I'm the former emperor. But he does get sort of a nuanced arc that maybe some of our figures haven't gotten. Like, I know with the Patriot, Mel Gibson, he doesn't want to fight and then he has to fight. But he had it, like, there wasn't really that much nuance. Like, he struggled between these ideas and then he kind of loses it and he does this. And then Les Mis, it was the students and they're leading this. And again, they're going into it and they know they're not going to live. And Russian Revolution, we do it from the point of Dr. Zhivago, who, as we said, is kind of static. He doesn't really change a lot. And then in this one, we have the figure who goes from absolute infant, like, everybody caters to me, I am literally the emperor, to I am just another worker in our country. It's just this very interesting evolution that this one lets us play out a little differently than I think any of the other movies have.
Comrade, this must be a mistake. I know this man. He is a good man.
Who are you?
I am a gardener.
Join us, comrade, or bust off.
All right, but here exactly, this is also what Mao didn't want to do, right? They specifically kept him alive to show that the Chinese communist system was superior to the Russian system, because we can actually re-educate somebody, and then they live the rest of their life happily gardening. See how much better this is. Yeah.
Because you think about it, and like how long the mentality was, we have to obliterate anybody who could possibly be a rallying point for people who object to what we're doing. You know, you even get, like, even not in Les Mis, but like the original French Revolution, when they just like get rid of the monarchy completely, well, as completely as they can, and you go back to the Middle Ages where you have like Prince John who becomes King John, and then is like, I'm going to get rid of my brother's kid because people might like him, and there's just so many instances where you see that they feel like the only way to really win or assert themselves is to get rid of the person who could be the rallying point. And I don't think we have a lot of movie instances that depict the opposite.
It's like Bin Laden also. Kill Bin Laden.
Yeah, but in this case also, he was no longer really a rallying point, though, right? So the communists got into power in 1949, and his rule had ended. His officially recognized rule had ended in 1911 or so, and in the meantime, so much had happened. And he had kind of made himself look terrible by going to rule Manchukuo under the Japanese. So he was very unimpressive.
And that's it, right? He's a traitor.
But they could have gotten rid of him in 1911.
He was unimpressive, but I have to say, like, to imagine like his Tinder profile. You can say I was an emperor. That's come on, and all the things that he did. He had a very, very interesting life. It's so at the end, the contrast is so powerful when he's there in the Forbidden City. This person, and only then I personally like realized the magnitude of being an emperor. At first, like him, you take for granted the fact that he's an emperor, but only at the end I'm like, wow. This guy was the Chinese emperor.
You are not allowed in there.
Who are you?
I live here. I'm the son of the guardian.
Well, I used to live here too. That is where I sat.
Who are you?
I was the Emperor of China.
It's just, it's not an achievement.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting to see how a person looks when you strip it all away. You know, and he just becomes like, he could literally just be some guy on the street and you would not really know out of context, right, what that does to people.
But it hadn't occurred to me that it was 1987, so 2 years before Tiananmen, like a decade after Nixon goes to China type thing. Like, that's a really interesting like background idea of how this movie was made and how it would be seen as a positive to say, hey, let's make a movie about the last emperor who the Chinese like magnanimously let live, right? They re-educate him and they give him things. And so that's really fascinating as some sort of potential piece of propaganda that was happening.
They also try to educate him, like if you go to the toilet at night, you have to piece the side of the bowl. This is something, I have a daughter, but if I had a son, I would have told her that, I guess, when he was very young. So in that sense, to your point, like they were actually helping him, like giving him basic tools to live. You can't be an emperor anymore.
Right.
You can't be a traitor anymore. So you have to learn something. And how would that movie be made today? First of all, it would be a Chinese movie. Like if there was ever a movie like that, it would be produced, written by China or financed by China, because we know now that the politics, we don't know now, but let's say prior to COVID-19, the Chinese have like the last say on a lot of movies by financing them, and with the NBA they had all this trouble, and also with the English Premier League, the Football League, the Soccer League, whatever they are very, very, very touchy about everything that could be perceived as criticism. And Rutger, you were talking about how maybe the Communist Party, you told me that off air, could be seen as the next evolution of the dynasties that preceded it. You want to elaborate a little bit?
Well, sure. Well, exactly. I think so. What's interesting about these dynasties, again, that they're not necessarily like blue-blooded rulers who think now it's my turn to be the king. Sometimes these were sort of commoners that rose up because they thought, well, it's time to establish a new order. So in that sense, Mao is just the next kind of emperor in that tradition.
Do you want to do you have like an overarching look of those two episodes, those 4 movies, those 4 revolution? Any thoughts about that?
Well, actually, I have one thing I want to say about The Last Emperor, because I had told you guys, it was the only one that I had never seen or engaged with in any way before. So I told myself when I was watching it that I was not going to look anything up until afterwards, because I just wanted to see it as a movie. And I broke my own rule in like 15 minutes in and started looking things up, but that's besides the point. But before I realized that it was actually based on things that he wrote about his own life, I thought, oh my God, are we really watching this movie where they bring in this like Scottish dude and he's supposed to be like our like Western gateway into this Chinese? They think we're like so stupid that we need to see somebody Western come in to see this, because we really don't. And so I'm like Googling it, like, what is going on here? And I'm looking at it and going, oh my gosh, like that really happened. Like imagine being that guy who is like, oh, this is what I did. Like that, to me, as somebody who admittedly did not know that happened, felt like it was going to be like a film device. And then I was like, oh my gosh, it's one of those moments you go, oh no, that's really how it went. And I liked that they didn't add it as a film device, that it was a real thing.
Yes.
It was really, it made it feel less forced. Because there are so many times when you watch these historical movies where they think that they need to insert something in order to make it identifiable to whoever their primary audience is intended to be.
Right, so here as a framing device, it could have been his book.
Right,
so
right, of course, exactly. So I was like on guard to be like annoyed about how we didn't need this. I was ready to be annoyed. I'm always ready to be annoyed. And then I was realizing it and going, oh, okay, I give it a pass. That's really kind of cool. But then I was just thinking about the way in which that education was important to him. Because he really kind of enjoys this education that he gets. And
having 2 wives also kind of enjoys.
Well, yeah, he does.
But the Western education, I mean, that happen with a lot of like kings and princes and so on? Oh, well, let's spend a year in Oxford or whatever.
Right.
Not only that,
Of
also
course.
Bashar Assad also was educated in the West. Though he's very, very progressive, right? Everything is open, but you can't divorce me. Come on.
Yeah.
Don't be silly.
No, I thought the wives were really interesting too, because I didn't know. I mean, I vaguely kind of knew who Puyi was, but I didn't know the details of what was going on, and especially I did not know about his wives. And I was fascinated that the one of them just leaves.
Yeah.
She's just like, I don't want any part of this anymore.
What did she do?
Yeah, I don't know what.
Like all of them, no one of them has like any life skills, marketable skills.
Where do you go?
Something. Yeah, where would you go? Who would you be?
You must be really fed up to just choose to go off when you really have nothing waiting for you.
So I think she went on to live her life, and I think she got remarried or something like that. And then when she passed away, she was buried. And then much later, there was reburials of some of the imperial family, and a bit more stately, but not her, because she had divorced, so she left the family.
She gave up
she was
that,
left in. That was a common grave. That's
fine.
Had been
Yeah,
buried.
that's fine. The interpersonal relationships were really interesting. I mean, when the scene where he finds out that his other wife is pregnant by somebody else, and then what they do to that. Oh my God! It was.
Yeah, that also really happened, right?
Yeah.
And she that the opium addiction was really because of that.
I mean, and you can imagine why.
And how about the Forbidden City? Just like seeing everything in the Forbidden City, like if you've been there, it's like totally empty, and just like seeing it. So it's.
I would love to see it.
There's something missing there, and I don't know. It's kind of symbolic in many ways to what the communists have done to China, to Chinese culture that preceded it. So there you see it come to life. It's just fascinating, seeing all the people walking around him, and wherever he goes, he stops. They can't look him in the eye, all kinds of like the weirdest things. How was he ever a normal person?
Oh, but that was also really, really good communist propaganda in some way. I mean, like the court is displayed as just very servile, and just with all the silly costumes and the kowtowing, and like the wet nurse, way too old still, and all that's like that's all perfect. Like, okay, this order needs to go because this is just idiotic and decadent, and it's time for something new. So also, like, what's interesting, what they say about the movie is that they say, well, we had completely free hands to film this, and oh my gosh, the Chinese of 1987 were very permissive. But I think that from the Chinese perspective, they probably also were pretty confident that this was going to be fine, because Bernardo Bertolucci is a Marxist who had previously worked with Pasolini, and he'd made Novecento, so he had already made a super, super long movie about peasant life in Italy, and he was probably going to say the right thing, so they didn't have to worry too much. And indeed, he did say basically what they kind of hoped would be said, I think. And it was probably from the PR perspective better to just let him do it and not interfere at all, than make it seem like, oh, this is a very heavily scripted and edited movie. So from their perspective, they did the perfect job of getting this movie done by a Westerner, staying on message, and making something visually appealing.
2 quick points. The blue sky in the Forbidden City, when I was there almost 20 years ago, there was no more blue sky, so that's also something, a historical relic. But to your point, I don't remember the movie saying anything negative about the Republic.
No, but that's also true, because Sun Yat-sen is actually revered both by the People's Republic and by Taiwan. So that's why they also... So first Sun Yat-sen kind of comes in to found the Republic, but very quickly he makes room for Yuan Shikai, who is actually kind of the last emperor, because he becomes first the president, and he becomes more and more dictatorial, and decides, no, I'm now going to be the emperor. But nobody liked that. So, and then he died like within a year or something like that. And that's when actually the whole thing also broke up into these different warlords. So Puyi is not really the last emperor, but at least the last dynastic emperor. And then this other guy who comes in, who you see briefly in the movie, he's the one that's riding around in the limousine with the open top, like, oh, this is the president of the Republic. Well, that's the guy Yuan, because Sun Yat-sen, again, like he's totally accepted by the People's Republic as an improvement relative to the emperors before. So they like him on both sides of the Strait of Japan. So there's also no talking smack about him at all.
Strait of China, maybe, no?
The Taiwan, I suppose. Well, you know, the People's Republic and the Republic of China.
The Japanese-centric view of everything. They have the Sea of Japan, that the Koreans want to call the Sea of Korea, all kinds of beefs. The islands...
I guess I misspoke.
we always get mad emails from angry Japanese listeners.
All the time, yeah.
God, know your geography.
So many Japanese listeners that are...
Yeah, but this is also the weird thing how it developed, because at first... Oh, I have an excellent anecdote. Sorry, just that I was going to insert that, and here we go. Okay,
here.
So
I'm ready.
Insert here. Splice, cut. Okay, ready. So my great-grandfather was a communist, and he was on a watch list of the Dutch Secret Services. And in the same lists, a couple pages down the line, is a guy called Henk Sneevliet. And there's now a metro station near Amsterdam named after him. Henk Sneevliet was also a communist. And Henk Sneevliet, he went from Holland first to the then Dutch East Indies to help the independence movement there and to help found the Social Democratic Party there. And then he'd become a Comintern operative. And from there, he was then sent to Shanghai to be present at the founding of the Communist Party of China, which actually happened in the French concession in Shanghai in a girls' school, because they thought, well, that's kind of safe there. And so they founded the party there, and then Henk Sneevliet actually advised Mao, what you really should be doing is continue to collaborate with the KMT to have this united front, right? And actually, so what's happened for a while in the history of China in the first half of the 20th century is that the nationalists and the communists work together, first to try to unify China and then later also to try to kick the Japanese out. So in this early history of China, sort of Sun Yat-sen was in the KMT. Later, Chiang Kai-shek was an asshole, but part of this nationalist movement was kind of acceptable from the communist perspective, and they were working actually together to get the foreign influences out of China and to turn it more towards something that served the people.
Yeah, and that also wasn't a given that the communists would come out on top.
Not at all.
After the Civil War.
No, they still had to do the Long March and all that stuff.
Long March, yeah. I want to see a movie about the Long March. And I want to see a movie about Napoleon. I want like a 10-part series on Netflix or HBO about Napoleon.
Why is there not a good Napoleon movie or a series?
Not a movie. I want like 10 parts.
Because I can't come up with somebody who would play him in a way that I would appreciate. I think about this all the time. Because I just feel like I would pick everything apart.
No, but you can find like a powerful French actor that has this charisma.
So did you see that documentary about the Napoleon enactor, though? I think that's on Netflix. That's like the guy playing Napoleon.
No, but now I want to.
There's a whole guild of people playing Napoleon and reenacting for Waterloo and so on. And then there's the one guy who supposedly looks the most like him, like he's the number one Napoleon.
Oh, now I need to see this. This sounds like my ideal thing to watch.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
He's French?
Oh, man.
No, he's English, so that's also kind of unacceptable to the French reenactors.
I feel like that should just discredit him immediately. He's like, I don't care.
Wow.
I think he was English, but speaks French really well, something like that. But then still, he's.
But the movie is English or the movie is French?
It was a documentary. I don't know. I think it's English.
Imagine being the English guy whose like whole life is playing like Napoleon. That would be just an amazing sort of mental disconnect.
Right. And how did you get there? What in life happened? What happened to you in life that brought you to this place? It's so random. Wouldn't it be like Rome, like the first season of Rome with Julius Caesar?
I love Rome.
It was wonderful.
Rome was
I want something like that. That's what I want.
Wonderful. I could do that. I could see that. I would watch that. I pity Liz for the text that she would get as I was watching it.
Well, I was just about to say that I would take screenshots of the text messages and just put them on Twitter and just be like, here we go, people.
She's going in.
This is what I'm receiving.
So I feel like these movies are very different from one another now that I'm thinking about the whole thing. The first was a national revolution. We didn't mention that. Mm-hmm. The first revolution, the American Revolution, is a national revolution, right? It's not class-based at all, which says something about the time that it happened, though.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Not much later, the French Revolution is, again, like the Marxist reading of the French Revolution is that it was a liberal revolution for the middle class. And then the Russian Revolution, that's more like for the masses. So there is kind of an arc there, and the Chinese Revolution is kind of a lot of things together. Both.
Yeah, I suppose that the communists might make the distinction that the Russian Revolution was more for the industrial proletariat, whereas the Maoist Revolution was more the peasant class on the countryside. I mean, that's just like the narrative that they stuck to. I don't know if that's actually meaningful in any way, but that's the distinction that's then being made.
I think we unintentionally did a really good job at picking movies that show different aspects
Intentionally.
of revolution. Because when we were talking about...
This was totally planned.
People are listening.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, guys.
Sorry about I cut you off, Christine.
No, it's just
you were
because...
saying how awesome we are.
Well, yeah,
Please
I
go on.
was. Well, because our conversation was really like, okay, what movies have you seen? What movies would you like to talk about? And how do we cover different regions of the world, more so than how do you cover different aspects of what a revolution is and who it touches? And I think just based on the way it came together, one of the things that I noticed, which I wouldn't have been paying as much attention to if it had been intentional, was that we hit so many different perspectives on what a revolution is and how the era in which the story was created, because they weren't all autobiographies, obviously, influences the way the story is then told on the screen, which I had not expected to think about when I started.
Right. Even The Last Emperor is the story of the deposed monarch / king. Even we have that in the revolution, the guy who lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You have the guy who lost everything. You have, the revolution that doesn't actually take off in Les Mis. You have the Patriot, which is the people who are trying to get rid of the king.
And he loses his sons in the Patriot, but he
Right.
doesn't lose any political power or
Right. And in Doctor Zhivago, you have the people who are kind of trying to get through when the revolution happens to them. So you really are looking at the fact that a revolution, whether you want it to or not, is going to touch all levels of society. And that happens no matter where you are in the world.
Boom.
I mean, every revolution looks different, but every revolution has some aspects of it that are the same. Like we said, there's no such thing really as a clean revolution, right? Even when you talk about the Glorious Revolution in England.
That was the best one, though, for sure.
Well, right, but it's still it's still not perfect, right?
So you would say that's your favorite revolution, but anyway.
Is that your favorite revolution?
This is my favorite revolution, for sure.
Can you please rank your top 10 revolutions right now?
They
do not have to be successful.
Well, number 2 would be Velvet Revolution. I have to agree with that. That was nice.
Yeah, the Velvet Revolution. That was a nice one.
Yeah, but I liked the way that it was unintentionally tying together all these different ways, because it was easier to make segues than I anticipated it being, and to tie them together, because there were aspects that overlapped, even ones that we probably didn't touch, because you could go on each of these movies for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I have all these notes. I don't know what to do with them.
I know. I have a whole 4 pages of notes from watching the movies, and then all the stuff that I was looking up, and you go, well, when they do a musical of The Last Emperor, we'll come back and revisit it. I kept texting Liz and saying, I'm going to keep trying to not talk about musicals, but it's not going to happen.
No, keep going. That has been a lot of fun for me.
It was fun. I enjoyed it too.
This was very fun.
Yep.
I think our listeners are going to be like, what is going on? This is so different. And I hope that they love it.
Experimental.
Yeah, for us it's also
experimental episode.
Yeah, I'm sure. But it was fun, which is nice. I hope it's fun for people to listen to. Because it's fun for us.
I'm always delightful, so I'm sure it's fun whenever anyone listens to me.
I know. People are going to say, wow, that girl Christine, she needs to go back on a script.
And that concludes this miniseries, which was revolutionary in more ways than one. Because of the topic, because we're waving the new flag of our Pod Academy, and because it was a collaboration with another podcast. If you liked what we did here, let us know in public. If you didn't like it that much, you can also tell us, but be a bit discreet. We're planning to do more of these collaborations once in a while. So if you'd like to do an episode with us, get in touch. We have a website at ourpodacademy.com, and we are on Twitter at ourpodacademy. This podcast is supported by listeners just like you, only more generous. If you'd like to help us out as well, you can do so at patreon.com/podacademy. Our next episodes will be about the series The Wire, about male friendships in movies, and about human-animal hybrids in movies. Check them out. We post a new one every Monday. Bye!